I hope you're good. I'm Laure. I'm from the Free Spirit Foundation, actually the General Secretary of the Free Spirit Foundation. First of all, I'd like to thank you all for this amazing weekend of hackathon. I hope we've all learned and shared a lot. And I'm here to talk with you about the IT for the Planet program. So I know Fabrice talked a bit about it in the opening ceremony, but I'd like to take a few minutes to tell you more about it. So let me share my presentation with you. Okay, so I think now you can see my screen.
Yes.
Yes, perfect. So first, it's important for us that you understand how it is born. Indeed, when the US Embassy in Paris contacted us about the hackathon, on one hand, we were thrilled to work on it, and on the other hand, we immediately thought we had to make something more permanent with it. We wanted to create something on the long term, because this is how we are used to work. So we started to figure out how to build a project with this long-term vision, and this is how IT for the Planet came out. I'd like to add that we've been lucky enough to be supported by the US Embassy and the US Department of State from the beginning of this journey. We all share this long-term vision here, which is great. So now, let me give you more insight into our IT for the Planet program. IT for the Planet program is a program dedicated to support IT initiatives with a positive impact. What do we mean by positive impact? By positive impact, we mean supporting vulnerable children, protecting forests and the oceans, as well as protecting wildlife, which all are in the Free Spirit Foundation DNA. But what do we mean by supporting? So we have 5 pillars. First pillar is identify, because it's all about identifying these initiatives to begin with. How do we do that? Obviously, a good example is organizing hackathons like this one to bring innovative solutions to the surface. So yes, our program will examine every solution submitted today. We also know that IT students and IT young professionals may have tremendous ideas, not knowing how to bring them to life. So we want to be able to identify them through partnerships with universities as well as startups incubators. The Free Spirit Foundation Summit, who's called Recréer le futur, or Rebuild the Future in English, will take place in Paris for the first time in autumn 2021, depending on the pandemic situation, obviously. And the whole purpose of this summit is actually to draw the lines of a more human and more environmentally aware world. So we will also use this opportunity to identify initiatives eligible for our IT for the Planet program. And building a strong community, which I'm going to discuss later, will also play a major role in identifying IT initiatives for good. So, once we've identified, the next steps consist in promoting, which is our second pillar. What will IT for the Planet do to promote the initiatives of the program? So first, we will use our social networks to reach a large audience, as well as our networks of partners. We will have partners of many kinds: university, private companies, public administrations, NGOs. So the initiatives will benefit from all these partners. They will also be promoted through dedicated events, such as our annual dinner. This dinner will gather heads of IT and heads of CSR from top-ranked companies, as well as IT companies. It will take place in a very prestigious place thanks to the US Embassy in Paris. And this will be an event to raise awareness and promote the initiatives of our program. Finally, our summit, Recréer le futur, Rebuild the Future, is also going to be a great place to share and promote the projects of the members of our IT for the Planet program. So let me talk now about the third pillar, which is connect. Because another aspect of the program is to connect people. Because we believe that having a great idea is only the first step of the journey. And we want to connect our members to key people to make this journey possible. So we will connect our members with IT companies and startups, but also with investors and business angels, as well as with NGOs. To us, building a network is the key success factor. Our first pillar is mentor, because what is also a key success factor is mentoring. Indeed, if students and young professionals come with great innovative ideas, they will always benefit from a more experienced mentoring. So we would like to provide mentoring by IT professionals to guide and inspire our members, as well as more business-oriented mentoring to help them build their project. Indeed, the main objective is to make the ideas a reality. So it's all about the fifth pillar, develop. So to achieve making the ideas a reality, we will help our members develop their projects to make them concrete. So we will provide our members with resources, either financial or human, so that they have the means to develop their project. And working on our 5 pillars, identify, promote, connect, mentor, develop, will eventually lead to creating a community. Because we truly believe that the community should be placed at the center of innovative solutions for the future. For instance, we see collective intelligence operating every day in the Free Spirit Foundation life. And what we can tell you is that if you go faster on your own, there's no doubt you will go further together. This way, we have our hearts set on building a strong community where ideas can emerge, enrich, be exchanged, where people can grow together and learn from each other. So, I'd like to conclude with this positive note and tell you that IT for the Planet may be European for its first steps, but our ambition is clearly to go global. So, thank you all for listening, and I hope to see you all very soon in our IT for the Planet program. Let's build this together.
Hello everyone! So before to start this presentation that is called IT to Consider the Biosphere, I wanted to thank you all for your involvement in this very nice event. I think it went very well, in grace of your involvement to all. Our participants were really motivated and they shown a lot of motivation. They asked a lot of questions, particularly from what I've observed to the mentors IT, but also to the partners and the specialists in wildlife that accompany us along the weekend, and that have done some very nice presentation. We learned things very interesting. And on the ethic for AI part, I would like to thank you, Sara. It was critical to have you on board. So why IT to consider the biosphere? When we say consider, it means two things. It means first to pay attention to. And it's important to pay attention to, because it means that we dedicate time to understand how it works and how it lives, and so we consider it really. The second meaning is that we evaluate it. As human, we evaluate things continuously. We have senses, 5 senses, so we can feel, we can hear, we can view, we can smell, we can taste, all that things that make possible for us to put together kind of data to predict and to make some decision on situations. With DIT, we have some additional senses today, as for example with the captors, the IoT, etc., that are able to feel things that we cannot feel as human with our body. Another thing that is interesting regarding the consideration is that as a human, as an individual, we could simultaneously consider a certain number of factors. But as a group of humans, we can even consider a larger number of factors to take a decision, for example. But as an IT system, with a lot of people connected, it's even better to take the decisions, or it's even a higher way to be able to take a larger number of factors to consider in decision processes. But we should not be far from the goal of this. So what is the goal of biosphere consideration or of the consideration? Is that we want to take care of. We have to understand things, to evaluate things in order to make some prediction, to be sure that we could take care of what we want, of what we need, of what we like, and coming to the next slide, so enriched and structured understanding of life, so that's talking about data as well. So in the term of biosphere, what does data means finally? So if we look at this very nice picture that shows different things, in fact, we have a giraffe, and we have a tree, and we have the savanne, and we have the earth, I would say. We see that it's not only isolated things. We see that there is an interaction, and that's, I think, the second idea after the consideration that it's important. This idea of interaction. Things are related together. So one track is to be able more and more to consider things that are interrelated together, that are definitely connected together, to see and to understand how they function, and how they impact each other. So the goal of this could be, as we said, to make some predictions, to make some analysis of correlation, but to measure interaction also. And why I do think that we are coming at the age of the interaction understanding, it's because of at least one reason. It's that we hear a lot talking about the big data, so we apply now big data strategy and a lot of domains, but on those specific topics that are key for the next generation and key for the next year now. It's the big data at its place. Why is that? Because it could help us to understand how things are related together. So not only isolated, we can capture more data and we can consider those data into systems that are going bigger and going more resilient as well, to understand not only one thing, but how things are connected together. So how to learn efficiently to address the stakes? So the stakes, we face a lot of stakes. We have, for example, the question of the wildlife and the nature, the biodiversity, the ecology, we have the energy, we have the education, so a lot of different stakes. What are the challenges on this? I think one of the challenge is that we have to learn from a diversity of situation to preserve it. So we have to understand a very large diversity of situation, of ecosystem, of in each of these stakes, we have to go very further, very deep into detail on a lot of different situations. But at the same time, we have to learn from repetition of experiences. Why is that? So we have to observe things repetitively. This is in order to make sure that our observation is relevant. It's not because I've seen one thing one time that I can deduce a rule on this one. It's not a fact. I have to observe it few times at least to make it as a relevant information. So we have a lot to do at the same time because we have to do this repetition of observation, but we want, on the first point, to learn on a very large diversity of situations. One idea I have in mind regarding this challenge is that maybe we could today distribute the learning capacities. So I'm just providing you with a very quick example. I hope it's relevant in that case. It's more regarding plant than the wildlife because I master more this subject. So I take this example. I have a lila on my in my garden, so it's in a pot, a lilac. It's very nice, but for a few years back, it was not going very well. It was going down. The leaves was disappearing in some places. So I was wondering what's happening to my lila. When I had a look closer to it, I've detected that there were some bugs reproducing on it. So I wanted to preserve my lila because I like it. So I decided to make something about these bugs, at least not coming back the next year, because it was seasonality phenomenon each year. So I've done some searches online. I went to a shop specialized on these things, and they say, okay, there is this you can pulverizate this thing and etc. But I didn't want to put something toxic, and it's not good for the child as well. So I was trying to find any solution, but I wasn't able to find any good idea representing this. On one day, I talked about this to my grandma, because I know she does like the lilac as well. And she said, have you tried to put a lavender aside your lilac? And I said, no, but why is that? And she encouraged me to try. And that's so I said, thank you, I've tried it. And the fact is that the next year, when I did it, I put my lavender close to my lilac. The bugs didn't come back. So the year after, I redid the same experience. So I kept the lavender close to my lilac. And again, no bugs. I was thinking, wow, how did she know that? So thank you, Grandma. How did you know that? I know that because I don't exactly remember. My mother or the mother of my mother told me, or etc. And I was thinking, wow, it's kind of the way that we can see the culture itself. The culture could be seen all around the world by repetition of experience, an observation of the result of this experience through times. And I was thinking that on the agricultural way, today, the way that we do the agricultural way, like with a lot of monoculture, unfortunately, but it's not not only bad because we have to feed a lot of people and a lot of animals, etc. So that's not something I want to go into detail, but it's not only bad. It's also an answer to a certain situation at a certain period of time. But the fact is that we continue in that way for now. Some things are evolving a little, but not very fast. The fact that we do this monoculture in a way avoid us to continue to learn on some new experiences in this type of relationships between plants, for example. So I was thinking maybe we could find some possibilities to distribute the capacity of experiencing things and plants, for example, but why not regarding the wildlife, we could say, because maybe the only way to consider the wildlife is maybe not by isolating it. Why not to think about different kind of situation, different kind of equilibrium between human, animals, plants, and etc. Kind of different equilibriums. And the other idea coming directly from this one is that after a while, distributing the experience, centralize the data from this experience, could be anonymized, but could be constitute could constitute a command for the human being or the planet, I don't know, for the next generation. So continue to make new experiences regarding the nature in order to preserve it in the future. That's bring me to the last slide of the presentation, which is tracks to prioritize between stakes. So it's also searching or tend to an equilibrium. It's at least a track of it is this one. So find an equilibrium between expertise and citizen representativity, because we do know that expertise is very important, is key. To understand things into details, but as well, the citizen representativity is very important. What does the people need? What do they want? So there is something in economics that it's called the utility function, that allow us to try to summarize what are the goals, what are the needs, what are the wishes of people, for example, but that could be animals. We can think about this function of utility on based those on how to respect things, how to respect a species, for example. What do they need to stay alive, to be in good health? So we could try to summarize on an individual way, but on a grouped way as well, the utility functions, because the weight of this function show what are the needs at a certain moment for each of those people, for example, or animals. And aggregating the result of this function of utility, not the result, aggregating the utility function of all individuals allow us to make a global utility functions to understand more what has to be prioritized at a certain period of time. And it brings us back to the interaction, I think, because it's a kind of finding a way to compose between the different utility functions and about all that we want to preserve. So it's more consider the end than the whole. So considering things at the same times. It's now possible with the performance and the resources that we have. So why not to give some tries? But why to prioritize? Again, this question. Because maybe we cannot do everything at the same time. We cannot face all the stakes and we cannot face all the projects, for example, at the same time. So we have to agree on what we are going to do. Why is that? Because we have to face, for example, the stake of energy spent. Energy spent is not translating only into carbon dioxide. It's only translating into entropy of things, as it was explained in the thermodynamic. So we have to be more resilient, to choose in which way we are going to invest some energy in order not to multiply the tracks and to spend a lot of energy in different tracks. I think on this one we have to try to focus and to be agreed on what we are going to focus first, but trying to consider a lot of things in the same time, so the interaction between things. And I think that's maybe one of the next events we could organize, like a hackathon that could consider different fields, so wildlife, but also human, but also energy, also education, how this is connected together and how we can search some solution in order to preserve and to ameliorate all of those at the same time. Last point regarding the ethic in AI, it's very critical. So ethic means also anticipate the impact. So it's not only I want to develop a solution today and okay, it will work perfectly, I will get this data, I will be able to do tomorrow this with those, but what about the day after tomorrow? How does it translate finally in different terms, and what other fields that this solution could impact? And understand more, that means understanding more the bias of our modeling, because when we consider different things at the same time, we can limit the bias, because sometimes the bias comes from the residual part of the model, so the unexplained part of the model. And this could come from the interaction that are not measured, the impact that I was not able to consider or to anticipate. There is a lot to say on those questions. I hope it was interesting and not too philosophical. And I was just wondering what could be the real positive impact of the IT, and maybe not going in too many directions at the same time, but trying to consider factors on expertise, on even citizen representativity, to find better solution for the future. Thank you very much for your attention. It will be a pleasure to discuss with you. This event is just marvelous, and I look forward to get to look at the next step. Thank you. Bye bye.
Hi everyone. I hope you can hear me. My name is Sara Regragui. I am very pleased to be here with you to talk about AI and ethics. I am specialized in digital transformation and strategy. I am also a PhD candidate in geopolitics and geoeconomics of the digital Silk Road around the world. And I also act as a conference interpreter for several international organizations. So today we're going to talk about AI and ethics. And there is a small outline for this presentation. We will first talk about the importance of ethics in AI, and then we're going to focus on biases and their influence on AI outcomes and the implications for wildlife with the special intervention of Liliana Jauregui, who is a specialist in this term. So, why ethics are so important for AI? Artificial intelligence is bringing new opportunities to our society and is radically changing the world we live in. Applications in different fields such as economics, finance, health, security, and even wildlife with the goals of making our lives easier. However, as AI is developing and expanding its potential, one important dimension we need to closely pay attention to is its ethical aspects and the biases that might derive from its application and exploitation. AI's aim is to make humanity's life easier and change the world for a better one. With the increasing development of AI, we should absolutely not ignore the ethical aspects of its use and its application. So what are the potential ethical issues that derive from the recent studies and research? We have several of them, but here I try to underline the most important ones. Mistakes prevention. Systems usually have a training phase in which they learn to detect the right patterns and act accordingly to their input. Once a system is fully trained, it can then go into test phase, where we have inputs of more examples and we see how it performs. Obviously, the training phase cannot cover all possible examples that a system may deal with in the real world. So these systems can easily be fooled in ways that humans wouldn't be. So for example, random dot patterns can lead a machine to see things that aren't there. So if we rely on AI to bring us into a new world of labor, security, and efficiency, we need to ensure that the machine performs as planned and that the people can't overpower it to use it for other ends. We also have racism. Though artificial intelligence is capable of speed and capacity of processing that's far beyond the human capability, it cannot always be trusted to be fair and neutral. We have several applications where AI is used to identify people, objects, and scenes, but it often can go wrong, such as when a camera missed the racial sensitivity of a picture, or when a software used to predict future criminals that showed bias against Black people. And we shouldn't forget also that AI systems are created by humans who can be biased and judgmental. So once again, if used right or if used by those who strive for social progress, artificial intelligence can be a true catalyst for positive change. We also have security. The more powerful technology becomes, the more it can be used for evil reasons as well as good ones. So this applies not only to robots produced to replace human soldiers or autonomous weapons, but to AI systems that can cause damage if used maliciously. So therefore, cybersecurity will become more important. After all, we are all dealing with a system that is faster and more capable than us by orders of magnitude. We also have unintended consequences. It's not just adversaries we have to worry about. What if artificial intelligence itself turns against us? So this doesn't mean that by turning evil in the human might become, but rather we can imagine an advanced AI system that can fulfill incredible goals, but with terrible unforeseen consequences. So in the case of a machine, there is unlikely to be evil at play, but rather only a lack of understanding of the full context in which the wish was made. So imagine an AI system that is asked to eradicate wildlife trafficking in the world. After a lot of computing, it spits out a formula that does in fact bring about the end of wildlife trafficking by killing everyone on the planet that Googles or buys animal products. So the computer would have achieved its goal of no more wildlife trafficking very efficiently, but not in the way humans would have done it. So while we consider these risks, we should also keep in mind that the technological progress means better lives for everyone. So artificial intelligence has a vast potential, and its responsible implementation is up to us humans. So now let's focus on biases. Biases have a strong influence on AI's outcomes. So here are two definitions from the dictionary. We have biases as systemic error that might be incurred when sampling or testing selects or favors one response over another, or the other one is an action or opposing a particular person or thing in an unfair way because of allowing personal opinions to influence your judgment. So basically, let's picture it this way. In our daily lives, we all make several decisions a day. How are we going to dress to go to the office? Although this one with COVID might not be available anymore. The brands of the drinks we consume, the car we drive, what movie or series we're going to watch on Netflix. And most of these decisions we make are biased. So our brain chooses the answer, and most of the time, this same answer is based on our own experience, education, and beliefs, which are responsible of that biased thinking. So what happens when decisions are made by a machine? Within AI, it is in machine learning where the biases can occur, since it is based on historical information. So as far as machine learning is concerned, biases can occur in various parts of this process, not only in the data as it would seem logical to think. So the question here is, how would we ensure fair system design and process? First of all, we must define and specify which problem we want to solve. This first step is extremely important because sometimes we do not take into account when estimating bias. We need to have enough precision. The second step would be considering the data we are going to select. It may be that they are not sufficiently representative of the problem we want to solve, or that they already include their own biases. And finally, it is very important to choose how the information is built around the algorithms. So this means we need to choose with precision the variables and the metrics that are relevant in each case. So for example, if we take the selection of species behavior, we need to take into account the environment, the subgroup of the species, the weather, the interaction with the sensors that will detect the animal if it harms or not the environment of that same species. So the accuracy of the model will depend on the choice of the attributes, and it will not only be easy to understand the implicit bias included in these data. However, on the research side, hundreds of related scientific papers and many other AI development companies are starting to create the tools to measure these biases and find effective ways to explain decisions made by their algorithm, because in the end, this represents a true risk for the industries that use AI. Now, what implications there are for wildlife? So as you know, the opaque nature of some machine learning algorithms means that the potential for unintended consequences may be high, and this could have a real-world consequences for people and wildlife. To have a more specific overview and insight on wildlife implications for AI, I am glad to invite Liliana Jaregui, who is an environmental justice expert at the UCN National Committee of the Netherlands, who will give us several examples of dilemmas that are observed in AI wildlife applications. Liliana, I give you the floor.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sarah, and good afternoon, everybody. My name is Liliana Jaregui, and I work on conservation issues, but also especially on international wildlife trade. And with the outline Sarah just did, I wanted to show you some of the practical examples that you can encounter when you're using your artificial intelligence instruments. And I think it's what Sarah just explained. It's very important to have innovations that are helping us to combat wildlife trade and not making things worse. So the first of the example is the ethnic profiling. In many of the wildlife trade issues, you see that there are many Asian citizens involved. And this is triggering racism already in the countries. So this is a very clear bias that we need to pay attention to. It's a big risk, and it's already happening without artificial intelligence. The second one is the use of drones while monitoring. Drones is a beautiful technology and a very nice instrument to follow wildlife. But when you're using it, you have to think that they are used in areas that are very pristine and vulnerable, and that communities that are living in those areas are not used to have these elements in these territories. So they are disturbing in a very invisible way for Western eyes the balance of these communities in those areas. And sometimes it has implications for certain groups, like, for example, women that are used to go out from their villages to gather water at certain times. And if you're using these instruments like drones at those times, you can do something with their schedules. So it's important that you have that information when you are thinking of using these instruments. The third one is privacy. I think that's one of the very clear ones in this combat that we have to stop wildlife crime. We want to bring justice and combat impunity, but we have to think at the price. Many organizations are, and this is linked to the next dilemma, many organizations are going very far doing research to identify the networks that are behind the combat the wildlife trade. But these organizations are private institutions. They are not police. They are not governed by public eyes, but they are doing excellent work. But they have access to private information. So how can we secure that this information, this sensitive information, is safe and is not going into the wrong purposes and other intentions? So these two, the privacy of this, the people involved in wildlife crime, but also combined with these private initiatives that are starting all over the world combating wildlife crime, those two are important to keep an eye on what is exactly the mandate and how is the information that they have at the moment secured. And finally, I have one about the incidents that are all over the world between wildlife and cattle, and what we call in conservation the human-wildlife conflict. There are researchers trying to register all the incidents and mapping the occurrence, the species that are involved, etc. And important to say that this is sometimes creating larger conflicts and diminishing the support that conservation projects are having. It's not that this is not important, that we need to register all these incidents, but it could bring us to unintended less support for conservation projects. One example is, for example, the wolf in Europe, also jaguars in Latin America, all these top predators. So important to have this information, but have a good look of what is the potential use of this research. So if you move to the next slide, please. Sara, do you want to finish the?
Yeah, I can conclude if you wish.
Yeah, please.
Thank you very much, Liliana, for this incredible insight that you gave us in terms of biases and potential conflicts that we have in AI applications for wildlife. So just to conclude, the main idea here and what we can take from all these experiences and researchers is that we are at the edge of a new era of AI and ethics. And in order to have a fair and successful AI for wildlife, we need to bring together wildlife and AI experts, as well as industry and authorities, to ensure maximum benefit and minimum harm from the application of AI in order to protect the world's most endangered species. So I would like to conclude this presentation. I thank you very much for listening to us. You can have our contacts, Liliana's contact here or mine, if you have any questions or you would like to further this discussion with us. Thank you.
Sara, we've got a question for you if you want to answer.
Yes.
So the first question is, what are your thoughts on the ethics of attaching collars to wildlife? Of course, you want to help, but if you treat them as equal, being humans, what about the physical integrity and privacy?
So if I understand the notion of collars.
Yeah, collars for dogs or for.
I can start with something.
Yeah,
and maybe Sara, you can complement me.
Yeah.
Because it's. I mean, I'm not talking about from the ethical side of things, but there are two groups within the conservation community, and also within the IUCN, which is the organization I work for, and the animal rights group and the conservation groups. And the conservation groups, they don't have this vision of animals with the same, the same, not rights, but the same situation as humans. So they see it as something which is necessary to monitor the biodiversity in general, not an animal, but as a group. On the other hand, you have the groups with animal rights, and I think both are important. What the animal rights group are doing is improving the technology so that these collars are not a huge burden for these animals and are not put with too much intrusion, so with more respect. But from the conservation world, both groups are very much sometimes confrontational. And what I can say is that both groups are necessary, because I think not a single one of them has the absolute right, perfect view. I think we need to understand how animals are moving and how they behave in a landscape. So we need an instrument to monitor them, and not all the animals are possible to follow with a drone, so like birds. So these instruments are for some species necessary, but I think what the animal rights movement are doing to push us to improve technology, to be better and not to be too intrusive, it's also helping us to treat animals in a more respectful way. That I can say for now. If you want to complement me, Sara.
So just to complete what Liliana just said, is all about a matter of fairness and middle ground and middle balance. I mean, now we are at the beginning of the animals' right movement, and we are starting with the domestic animals, etc. And now we are trying to raise awareness about all of these new species and the endangered species. So we are at the beginning of a new era of awareness and outreach. And as long as we try to find the middle ground to not harm either the human side or the wildlife side or the domestic side, I think we have a good path to go. I see that we have another question.
Mm-hmm. I see it, yeah.
Yes, totally. So the question is how to tackle the possible ethnic profiling issue. For example, shark fin soup is mainly served in China. If you don't address the issue as its cultural roots, how can we end this consumption?
So thank you for this question. So the ethnic profiling issue is a very tricky one, because sometimes when we want to track a specific species that is endangered, like for example sharks or other species like pangolin, etc., what we might find ourselves doing is discriminating people. Like now you said that this kind of shark is consumed by Chinese people. Sometimes authorities might trigger and track only Chinese people in a specific community, and that is discriminatory, because sometimes these Chinese people have nothing to do with shark consumption. And the other side to this story is that now COVID-19 is an incredible occasion and opportunity for humanity to really understand what are the stakes around the wildlife consumption. We had the COVID-19. Thanks to it, we understood that it is because of pangolin consumption and wildlife in wet markets that we might have these direct, strong consequences on human life with diseases. So I am sure that it is all about outreach and awareness. As long as I'm sure that now, for example, in China, as long as they are providing new awareness programs about wet markets and wildlife consumption, mentalities and mental models will be disrupted and broken. So it is all about outreach and trying to tackle the cultural side of it and explain what are the stakes and the potential very bad and harmful outcomes that are there, such as diseases. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, maybe something very short to complement. I think, well, one thing is the consumption side, but also there is the side of the traders and the hunters. So the responsibility is also shared. And finally, I think the groups are part of the problem and part of the solution. So it's important also to have a dialogue and not only to blame people, but also to try to involve them in the solution part of things. So artificial intelligence is important to identify the problem, but then it comes the political side of things. And then you have to start talking to people. And if you want them on the table, the best way is not to put them all on one side and make an enemy of you, but try to get on your side and to think with you in terms of a solution. So politics is important, to find a solution.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Liliana and Sarah. Thank you so much for this presentation. It was very, very interesting, and it raised very as well interesting question. So now we're gonna watch reports sent by our partner EcoJust, and then we're gonna end this live for today with a presentation from Craig Hoover, Executive Vice President of the Associations of Zoos and Aquariums. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
The city of Belém is everything that Rio de Janeiro is not. This is not the Brazil of sweet samba. Belém is in the northeast, a tougher part of the country, a port. There is a price for everything here, especially for the beautiful, strange creatures of the Amazon jungle. After drugs and weapons, animal trafficking is big business here.
Isso é a comida do macaco, a taranta.
Every year, thousands of Brazil's animals begin their journey to the United States and Europe from ports like this one. Interpol claim this illegal trade is worth up to $20 billion a year. I met with an animal trafficker.
¿Y cuál es el animal que más gostam los gringos?
Então, depende do gosto de cada uma pessoa, entendeu? Não é todo mundo que vem procurando só animal, são vários. Querem uma arara, querem um papagaio, querem um macaco. Não, o que eu penso é que é meu trabalho, eu tenho que vender, meus filhos têm que comer, aí é dessa maneira.
For many traffickers like him, trading animals is less morally problematic than selling drugs. But just look at how the animals are treated. Packed like fruit, many of the creatures don't survive the journey to become pets in the US and Europe. Belém lies just where the Amazon River opens out onto the Atlantic Ocean. I was on my way to meet a man who was ready to take me hunting, right in the heart of the Amazon rainforest.
Diego, prazer, bom dia. Como é que tá?
His name is Carlos. He's lived all his life here. He lives in a basic wooden hut with children and grandchildren to feed. And since he was 12, he's been catching creatures to sell. He's very poor. His whole livelihood comes from the rainforest. For him, selling animals is easy money, available right here in his back garden.
It's making a noise to call the monkeys.
I couldn't hear a thing, but Carlos was certain there was a big monkey nearby.
Esse foi dos grandes. Macaco grande. Pra cá.
We've been walking for 3 hours in 40 degrees heat. But there was still no big monkey. Carlos seemed depressed.
Mas a gente tá nisso, estamos nisso aí para sobrevivência. É a lei do povo do sítio, é a sobrevivência. E nós vamos encontrar ele.
Vamos encontrar ele?
Vamos encontrar.
We never found that monkey. This is the other face of the animal trade in Belém. Here, in an animal rescue center, they are trying to help this macaw parrot back to some kind of normality. Most of his feathers have dropped out because of stress and infection. The parrot is too frightened to leave his cage. He was rescued just before he was going to be trafficked, and is clearly terrified of human beings.
Veio animal bem magro, tá? Nós vemos pela quilha do peito aqui. Ele já tem a perda completa das penas deles, pelo corpo, só sobrou as penas que não estão boas na ave.
They're not sure here that the parrot will survive. We went on a trip around the sanctuary. It's a bit like a supermarket, full of the lost and found of the animal trafficking trade. First, we meet these baby jaguars. Their mother had been killed to enable their capture.
¿Cuánto cuesta un bebé de onza?
$50.000.
The adult jaguar had a particular problem.
Então ele tem esses hábitos, ele se masturba. Provavelmente ele foi estimulado pelo dono.
This abuse of animals shows that there is an even darker side to the animal trafficking world. But the most common creature here is the three-toed sloth, the world's slowest mammal. These animals are very gentle and trusting, and for obvious reasons, they are very easy to catch. They sell on the black market for up to $1,000. Having seen the animals in the rescue center, I decided to go back to Carlos in the Amazon jungle. He is possibly the world's worst hunter. I wondered if he'd had any more luck since I last saw him.
¿No has visto a los macacos, no?
Só nós, aquela árvore lá derrubando fruta. Aí eu me bati na cabeça de, poxa, olha os macacos aqui. Tinha mais ou menos uns 20 macacos lá. Aí eu consegui só um.
The monkey had already been sold in Belém overnight. That's how fast the black market moves here. But today is another day, and Carlos has to go hunting again. He was confident that this time we'd be lucky. Once again, the monkeys were playing hide and seek with us. But there was one animal that Carlos could catch. A three-toed sloth.
Cortar o galho. Vai. Filho.
¿Ese lo vende?
Vende. É filho.
¿Es filho?
Filho.
Quanto custa?
Esse mede 50 reais. Isso é dócil.
Carlos doesn't waste any time. The baby sloth, clearly bewildered, is tied up just like a prisoner. Within seconds, Carlos is on the move again. He's spotted another trophy.
Mas ele é tranquilo.
Não.
É, pode pegar, ó.
Não, graças.
Aqui, ó.
Não. Vale a pena.
Olha. É dócil ele.
Es suavecita.
Watching Carlos, I couldn't help wonder how long before the rainforest is stripped of all its little creatures.
E muitas pessoas, como um caso gringo, ele chega um bichinho desse, ele fica louco. Fica louco porque ele vê o bichinho tá todo vivo aí, espernegando tudo. Aí ele pergunta quanto é que custa, né? Aí a gente dá o preço de 50 a 100 reais. Aí prontamente eu quero, aí pá, pega o animal, aí puxa o dinheiro, aí vai embora.
Carlos is poor. He's at the bottom of the animal trafficking chain. While there are still people in America and Europe who are willing to pay thousands of dollars for exotic birds and animals, people like Carlos will continue to go hunting for them.
Overfishing is one of the most I'm convinced that the issue of overfishing is one of the most serious problems that we are facing as a global community presently. We as a rich part of the world is actually purchasing illegally fished fish that is taken from poor countries. That, I mean, I can hardly find anything that I feel is as important as this.
%80 of life on Earth lives within our seas and oceans. Yet tragically, 3/4 of the world's fish stocks are defined by the UN as fully exploited, overexploited, or depleted due to overfishing. Many of our marine and coastal ecosystems are dangerously close to collapse. Illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing, or pirate fishing, is one of the greatest threats to these already vulnerable marine environments and the people who rely on them. It is a global problem taking place on an industrial scale. In financial terms, global losses from pirate fishing are estimated to be between $10 and $23.5 billion a year. That's 1/5 of the value of the entire global catch.
I don't know if you can understand, we are talking about an industry with 10 billion euros a year. This is a huge amount. We are talking about the EU importing almost 16% of our imports from illegal fisheries. So we have to change the situation.
Pirate fishing vessels are undermining legitimate fishing operators and stealing from the millions of poor and vulnerable people who rely on the ocean for food security and income. Like other criminals, they employ a variety of methods to avoid detection and steal with impunity. Pirate fishers regularly change vessel names, obscure identification markings, bribe enforcement officials, refuse to pay fines, and attack locals. Some are involved in other illegal activities, such as drug smuggling, gun running, and human trafficking. The use of flags of convenience, whereby vessels buy flags from states which are unable or unwilling to monitor their activities, is another strategy employed by pirate fishing vessels to avoid scrutiny. This practice facilitates the exploitation of vulnerable workers to minimize costs and maximize profits. As a result, violence, abuse, and bonded labor are all too common. Pirate fishers rely on a lack of monitoring and enforcement in places like West Africa, where stealing fish is highly lucrative and relatively easy. The vessels often target inshore exclusion zones, or IEZs, areas that were established to protect shallow, coastal waters where fish reproduce. Artisanal fishing communities rely heavily on these protected zones for food and income. They are being devastated by pirate fishing.
The impact of IUU fishing on West African fishing communities is vast. I mean, we have people that are depending on fisheries for their livelihoods, and at the same time you have all these foreign boats that come into the EEZs of these countries and emptying the seas of their food. So of course it's very, very serious what's going on.
Often using illegal and destructive fishing gear, pirate vessels target high-value species, generating huge amounts of unwanted bycatch, which is thrown back into the sea, dead or dying. Many artisanal fishermen and their families rely on fish as their only source of animal protein. Right now, coastal communities across West Africa are reporting dramatic declines in the size and quantity of fish being caught. As a result, fishers spend longer at sea for fewer, smaller fish. Illegally caught fish is entering the EU market and ending up on the plates of consumers throughout Europe. Progress has been made through the implementation of the EU IUU regulation, a dynamic and groundbreaking piece of legislation that allows fish to be seized in EU ports, flag states to be encouraged to improve their monitoring and control, and coastal states to be engaged in protecting their marine resources. Despite the early successes of the regulation, more work is needed to ensure the law is applied proactively and uniformly, and that illegal fish is stopped from entering the EU while safeguarding legitimate operators.
70% of all fish that is consumed inside the European Union now is being fished elsewhere. And that is, of course, the result of our overfishing of our own waters. But now we're turning to fish from other parts of the world, and some of it comes from, a lot comes from developing countries, and some of it also comes from illegal sources. And I think that the European Union has the capacity. We're a rich region of the world. We have the major responsibility, I think, in addressing IUU fishing internationally. If we don't do it, who should do it?
EJF is calling on the world's major seafood markets to say no to illegally caught fish, for flag states to better control their distant water fishing fleets, and for the development of a global record of fishing vessels, requiring each boat to have a unique vessel identifier.
We must have full traceability, full identification, a global record, and this would increase traceability to the extent that we could stop IUU fishing.
It's time to take action to end illegal, unreported and unregulated fishing, to protect the fragile marine habitats and biodiversity that are vital to so many communities and which underpin the sustainability of our global fishing industry.
So thank you again, and thank you to EAZA for providing the opportunity to be with all of you here today. I'm going to take us, as Danny described, in a little bit of a different direction and talk about two different but related topics, and that is the role of zoos and aquariums in CITES and the role of zoos and aquariums in combating wildlife trafficking. And I'll start with a very brief overview of CITES for those who've not had the pleasure of working on this international treaty. So CITES, or the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species, is an international agreement that establishes a uniform system for regulating international wildlife trade. Its stated purpose is to ensure that international trade is both legal and sustainable. Its terms and conditions are legally binding on its member countries, and the treaty provides regulatory controls, particularly through a uniform permitting system, for more than 35,000 species of wild animals and plants that receive varying levels or degrees of protection based on which appendix or which list of species protection they are included. There are currently 182 member countries, plus the European Union, which is a party in addition to its individual member states. All of the members or parties are subject to the provisions of CITES, as are non-members who wish to trade with member countries. And so essentially CITES has global coverage and application. Further, CITES, unlike many other international environmental agreements, has force of law and strict penalties, including the potential for trade suspension for parties that fail to meet its requirements. So that's a very brief introduction to CITES and how it operates. And so I'll pose this question. I guess I'm posing this question to myself. Why should the zoo and aquarium community care? And I would start with the fact that CITES decisions and species listings affect the movement of our animals. So we have a vested interest. We also have an opportunity to have influence. CITES conducts its work in a very open and transparent way. Though only the member countries have the opportunity to vote, non-governmental organizations, intergovernmental organizations, industry groups, and others have the opportunity to have substantial influence. These organizations can speak in meetings, they can participate in working groups, they can help with drafting documents, and they can provide advice, including providing advice to the voting members. Third, we, the zoo and aquarium community, have relevant expertise as scientists, as conservationists, as policymakers, as wildlife transport experts, and as regulated stakeholders. And often we have expertise that is not found in the other participants in CITES meetings. So we add value to the decision-making process. Fourth, it's consistent with our purpose of protecting threatened and endangered species. And then lastly, decisions that have great impact on us will be made whether we are in the room or not. There are numerous and growing voices within CITES that do not support zoos and aquariums. And so I would advocate that we are much better off if we are at the table and making our voices heard. And just to give you some specific examples of the potential impacts or effects on our community, this is just a partial list of some of the species that were added to the CITES appendices or that were uplisted at the most recent CITES conference. These meetings of the Conference of the Parties happen approximately every 3 years. The most recent one, COP18, was held in Switzerland in 2019. And just for further information, species that are listed in Appendix 1 are essentially generally prohibited from commercial international trade. They require permits issued from both the exporting countries and the importing countries. And there is a rather strict restriction on the movement of those specimens. Species listed in Appendix 2 are allowed in commercial trade, but it requires a permit issued from the exporting country and a determination that the trade is both legal and sustainable. And as you can see from this list, many of these species are held in our zoos and aquariums, and the movement of these species is impacted by these listings. This does not, of course, mean that we should oppose such listings, and in fact, EAZA, WAZA, and AZA supported many of these proposed listings at this most recent meeting. But it's important for us to evaluate the impacts of such listings, to apply the proposals against the listing criteria, to provide our own advice, and to be prepared for the implications of these listings when they occur. And though the species listings themselves get most of the attention, it's the room that most people want to be in. The other room that happens at a CITES meeting, I would argue, is in fact the more important one, and certainly the more important one for our community. That's the room where implementation decisions are being taken. And so in addition to species listings, there are dozens of other issues that are discussed at a CITES Conference of the Parties that have potential impacts on zoos and aquariums, or they are issues where we have relevant expertise. Again, this is just a partial list from the most recent meeting, but it included development of a definition of the term appropriate and acceptable destination, which applies to the movement of specimens from certain populations of live elephants and rhinos. It included discussion of the development of definitions of purpose codes, including a definition that would apply to the movement of zoological specimens. There is discussion of disposal of confiscated specimens, and of course zoos and aquariums are also often the recipients of confiscated wildlife. It involved efforts to advance the development and implementation of electronic permitting systems. CITES still generally operates on paper, And there is movement to develop electronic permitting systems, and we certainly have an interest in that discussion. It also involved discussion of streamlining and promoting the movement of certain low-risk specimens, such as specimens that were bred in captivity, where we also have an interest. And then the last thing I would touch on from this most recent meeting is there was extensive discussion regarding two particular areas of trade, and that is the trade in songbirds and the trade in marine ornamental fish. And going forward, this will involve additional investigation and study of these two areas of trade, convening technical workshops, and making recommendations for action. And these are two areas where I think we could add great value to the discussion and be valuable actors in the recommendations that come out of these efforts. And I would anticipate that one of the outcomes will be additional proposals for species of songbirds and marine ornamental fish to be listed in the CITES appendices, and we should contribute to those discussions and be involved in the process from the very beginning. And I'll close out the CITES portion of my 15 minutes to talk about the next meeting and the opportunities that I see for our community at that next meeting. The next CITES Conference of the Parties is scheduled for Costa Rica in 2022. And I see several opportunities for our community at that meeting. Given our extensive support for field conservation in Africa, I see an opportunity for us to be honest brokers between the more protectionist countries in West Africa, and specifically also Kenya, and the more use-oriented countries in East and Southern Africa. This is a divide that we have seen in CITES for a long time, but the vitriol was particularly evident at the last meeting. And I think it's driven in part by animal rights groups with regard to the more protectionist countries, and the hunting community and commercial interests with regard to Southern Africa. And I see an opportunity for us. I believe our community lands somewhere in the middle of that spectrum. And I believe we can be, again, we have an opportunity to play that role of honest broker to bring those countries together. We're also seeing growing anti-zoo sentiment among some CITES parties and the non-profit organizations that participate in CITES meetings. And we need to counter those often false and misleading messages. We need to promote the roles of zoos and aquariums in conservation, in welfare, and in sustainable use. And perhaps most importantly, we need to leverage our commitment and contributions to CITES more broadly to achieve positive outcomes for the issues that are most impactful for our community. I've worked in this forum for a couple of decades, and one of the things I've learned is that reputation is particularly important. And I believe we have an opportunity to build our reputation as valuable contributors, particularly on those issues where we don't necessarily have a strong interest, so that our reputation speaks for itself when we need to speak up on those issues that are of most interest to us. And so with that, I'd like to turn our attention a little bit to the role of zoos and aquariums in addressing wildlife trafficking. As you know, wildlife trafficking is a significant threat to the long-term survival of thousands of wildlife species. And with the pandemic, it's never been more clear that legal and illegal wildlife trade that poses a threat to human or animal health also poses a threat to the very survival of our community. So it's imperative that we be actively engaged on this issue. I believe we also have unique expertise. We have established capacity. For example, at AZA, we host the Wildlife Trafficking Alliance, which is a coalition of more than 70 leading companies, nonprofit organizations, and AZA-accredited zoos and aquariums working together to combat wildlife trafficking. We also host the Zoo and Aquarium All Hazards Partnership, which works to disseminate critical information on prevention, protection, mitigation, response, and recovery to the managed wildlife community. We also have robust and active conservation and government affairs programs, such as at AZA, the Saving Animals from Extinction program. We model good wildlife practices. We support wildlife law enforcement by housing and caring for confiscated specimens. We are leaders in the communities where our facilities are located. And we have a unique ability, unlike any other organizations, to mobilize the hundreds of millions of guests who visit our facilities every year. And if that's not sufficient reason to be engaged on this issue of wildlife trafficking and wildlife trade that poses a threat to human or animal health, there are also, I would argue, strong business reasons for our attention. We have a vested interest in assuring that legal, sustainable, and ethical trade remain accessible to our facilities. Our engagement positions us as thought leaders for conservation and welfare, and it provides an additional platform and area for us to engage our visitors and demonstrate that we are purpose-driven organizations. And I'd like to share with you one way that we are tackling this issue, particularly in this moment. And we have developed a wildlife trade initiative that we have not launched yet. So this is highly top secret, and I would ask the 250 of you who are viewing this to not tell anyone else. So we are in the final stages of a specific initiative focused on wildlife trade as a response to the current pandemic. And so I'd like to share just the broad concept of what we're developing now. Although, as I've described, we are engaged on CITES, on wildlife trade and wildlife trafficking more broadly, this particular initiative will focus on reducing the risk of zoonotic disease spread by addressing wildlife trade that poses a threat to human health. There are numerous efforts in this landscape already, and I'll talk about some of them in a moment. We see this as an opportunity to provide a comprehensive framework to build on existing initiatives, to connect efforts across our community, and to position us as thought leaders in this area. Our initiative will bring together and mobilize key programs, partnerships, expertise, and opportunities to engage the public and engage governments. As I described, it will bring together our Wildlife Trafficking Alliance, our Saving Animals from Extinction programs. It will engage our board of directors and our committees. It will tap into our member expertise and be an opportunity and a platform for engaging external partners and other initiatives. The guiding principles of this initiative include respecting the needs and rights of local communities. One of the things that we've seen already with regard to the pandemic is a number of organizations that are, in my view, overreaching on this issue and using it as an opportunity to serve other agendas, including efforts to close down all wildlife trade, regardless of whether it poses a threat to human or animal health. We see this as an opportunity to address the issue holistically via a One Health approach, to collaborate to enhance preparedness, to amplify other initiatives that align with our principles, to harness our collective resources, and to recognize that legal, sustainable, and ethical trade should also be protected. So I mentioned that there are other initiatives out there, and there are a few that do align with our principles on this subject, and I'd like to just mention 3 of them. The first is an initiative called End Wildlife Crime, which is led by ADM Capital Foundation, the Global Environmental Institute, the Born Free Foundation, the International Conservation Caucus Foundation, Systemic, and the Food and Land Use Coalition. And it is chaired by John Scanlon, who's the former CITES Secretary General. And it's very focused on 2 goals, and those are amending CITES to incorporate trade that poses a threat to human or animal health, and establishing a 4th protocol on wildlife crime under the United Nations Convention Against Transnational Organized Crime. And we are proud to have been the first international champion of this initiative. The second is the Preventing Pandemics Initiative, which is led by World Wildlife Fund and calls on the US government to work in concert with other governments, both to affect change domestically within the United States and internationally to prevent future pandemics. And then the last one is called End the Trade, which is led by the Wildlife Conservation Society, global wildlife conservation and wild aid, and is focused on banning trade and sale of live terrestrial animals for consumption. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with this initiative because many zoos and aquariums have already signed the pledge under this initiative. And I'll close with this quote from AZA's president and CEO, Dan Ash, which he offered in testimony before a U.S. Senate committee recently. And the quote is, "Our current crisis was knowable, predictable, and preventable. And unless we learn these lessons and take steps to reduce related risks, the same will be true of the next pandemic and the next. I believe the opportunity for us to act is now, and that we are well positioned to lead in this space. And I encourage you to join us, and I look forward to the opportunity to answer your questions. Thank you."